All right, it is 10:50. For sake of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, my name is Alicia Oren, and I am a social emotional learning coach for the MSD of Wayne County. We want to welcome you so much to our first annual Social, Emotional, and Wellness Blitz. Just a couple housekeeping things today. We're going to ask that everybody keep their mics off throughout the session. And then at the end, we will have time for Q&A. You are more than welcome to add your questions to the chat box throughout and interact through there. Krista, you're more than welcome to answer them during the real time, or I'll try to keep track of them for the end of the session. Also, at the end of the session, we will ask that you complete a short survey to give us some feedback on both this session and then at the end of the entire event. So with that, I'd like to introduce Krista Fay.
Hi, my name is Krista Fay, and I'm the Mental Wellness Coordinator here for Avon Community School Corporation. I am a licensed clinical social worker and a licensed school social worker. This is my 11th year in education and my 13th year working with young people. And I'm really excited to be here today to share with you and this is just one district's experience with implementing and integrating SEL, PBIS, MTSS, and trying to put all those things together. And I don't think there's a more appropriate time to be using the phrase building the plane while you're flying it in light of all the things that have been going on. So we are going to go ahead and get started. And again, the title of this I came up with a long time ago, but I wanted to share a quick little video as we get started. This is how it feels on a normal school year with everything that's happening now with COVID and reopening. This little video really speaks to, I think, a lot of the feelings that people are having. So hopefully the audio is okay on this. If not, I'll make sure that the PowerPoint goes out to everyone and you can click on this when it works for you.
Some people like to climb mountains. I like to build planes in the air. I grew up wanting to be on a wing, wanting to be up this high. Sometimes the temperature up at altitude will reach 60 below. It's crisp, it's refreshing. You never know what you're going to come across up there. Million geese, mallards, owls. These people back here, that's why I come to work. That's why I build airplanes in the sky.
We're not just building a plane here. We're building a dream.
I love this job. I got a lot of things up here. When I look over there and I see that little kid, and look in his eyes, that's all the things I need.
So you gotta love a good old Super Bowl commercial from many years back, but that is a very accurate representation of how it feels when you're trying to do so many things at once, trying to be all things to all people at all times. And we know now more than ever, our students and our staff are going to need us in ways that we could not have imagined a year ago. So this is just trying to share a little bit of the systems and structures that we use to put in place to really try to make sense of things. What we noticed is that there were a lot of competing initiatives that were going on. And what we tried to do is come under the umbrella of MTSS to really try to figure out, instead of having these isolated pockets of competing ideas, how can we make these come together and make sense holistically and in a way that doesn't add more? It just kind of streamlines things that we're already doing to try to make sure that students are receiving better services when it comes to social emotional learning and with mental health. So we're going to go through a few things today. We're going to talk about a historical timeline because it's important to know where we've been to figure out where we want to go. We're going to talk about our tiered systems of supports and the structures that we've created, and I'll share visuals with you guys along the way. And then also want to acknowledge that this is very much an evolving process. We've gone through iterations upon iterations, making changes, adapting real time to what's going on, and we know that that's going to be the mantra for moving forward in whatever this school year holds for us. So we just kind of wanted to set the tone a little bit for what the presentation is going to look like. So real quick, we need to look back to look forward. Avon really kind of started the journey of embracing mental health supports for students in 2012. The director of special education at that time was able to reach out to a community mental health agency here in Hendricks County called Cummins, and they were able to come on board in one school. And over the years, they've been able to slowly integrate more and more supports into what has been able to be offered here for Avon to offer school-based mental health services for kids. Those services were limited to insurance status and the availability of paneled providers, which was a need that we found and we were able to address over time as we started to look at what options were available to us. Things really got moving and shaking in 2016, and many of you guys know when Lilly Endowment reached out with a comprehensive counseling initiative, and Avon was one of the districts that applied, and in September 2017 it was awarded to Avon. One thing that happened that was really, really big in 2017 as a result of the Lilly grant for Avon, we have 12 schools in our district. We have 7 elementary schools that serve K through 4. We have 2 intermediates that serve grades 5 and 6. We have 2 middle schools that serve grades 7 and 8, and we have a high school that serves 9 through 12. Before the Lilly grant, we had counselors who were having to split buildings and had caseloads of approximately 1,100 kids. For example, one counselor served both our smallest and our largest elementary schools and was there different days, different times, and it really limited the types of services that could be provided and especially consistency for students. So one huge part of the Lilly grant for Avon was increasing the number of school counselors they had to really work at getting one counselor full-time in every building. They were able to add 2 counselors right away from the Lilly grant. In 2018, I'm going to take a breath. This is exciting. I've been waiting to talk to you guys all day long, and so I'm going to take a breath and just kind of calm myself down real fast. In 2018, Avon was able to successfully pass a referendum that was really driven around reducing class sizes and making sure that students had access to the appropriate adults. Through that referendum, 2 more counselor positions were added. Because of the work that Avon was doing with trying to reduce counselor caseloads and really work on implementing social emotional learning, they were approached by the state to apply for a grant, a federal grant from SAMHSA called Project Aware, and that was awarded in 2019. Through that grant, they were able to add my position as the mental wellness coordinator, and then also were able to advocate for general funds to add 1 more school counselor. So now our school counseling group in 4 years has gone from 19 to 25. And that really got us to at least 1 counselor in every building, obviously more at our intermediate middle schools and high schools where things are looking a little bit different with scheduling. In the fall of last year, in the fall of 2019, we added more staff through our Project Aware grant, and we added 4 social workers who would compose our mental wellness team. And I'm going to talk more in depth about what they are, how they serve, and how that moves in a little bit. We also added in the fall of last year an idea called contract hours. We had a great relationship with Cummins to provide school-based mental health. But again, one of the barriers that we were facing were insurance. We had lots of students who really needed a high level of service, but because their families had private insurance with an incredibly high deductible, those kids we were watching them fall through the cracks. So we started an idea called contract hours, where we could bridge those spaces where students needed help and make sure that they got support that they needed. And I'm going to share the data with you as well, so you can kind of see and learn if something is making sense for you in your district. Please take it. If you can start a step ahead of where we ended up because of the shared information, please do that. We want to be very open and transparent about what worked and where we struggled, so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel. Use what we've done, take it and make it your own, so that you guys can start in a better place to serve students. The goal of talking about all of those different things is to really help us come to the visual of we needed to have a better integration of our services. We need to have, when we're adding staff, when we're gaining resources, you also have to build in communication pathways. How are things going to function? What are the processes to get from point A to point B? How does this move? How does this work? We really wanted to try to build a more unified social emotional learning mental wellness support team to make sure that we are providing timely and targeted supports to students. It has been a growing process for us. We haven't gotten everything right on the first try, but we are honing in and getting a lot better about where we want to go and what we want to see happen for students. So now we're going to talk a little bit about our tiered systems of supports. When you're talking about all these different roles of school counselors, social workers, mental health providers, we really wanted to be intentional about how do we merge these supports without duplicating our efforts. We really wanted to make sure that we're providing the supports that are needed and that we're not cycling back around and around and around. We want to make sure that we're moving students forward and then also releasing them off as it makes sense and as it's appropriate. We knew we've got about 10,000 kids in our district. We know that we have students in need. The work that the counselors did in writing their Lilly grant showed us, students were telling us, parents were telling us, especially at the high school level, that there's a lot of struggle when it comes to feelings of stress, feelings of anxiety, and feelings of depression. How do we respond to those concerns in a timely way, knowing that while we do have more resources than we had before, our resources are limited, and how do we kind of push those services out? The idea of going through a system like MTSS as kind of our shield or as our cover was to really kind of braid and align things to help it make sense for our administrators and for our teachers. If we're following a certain process when it comes to academic support, when it comes to looking at how are students performing, what are the needs, what are the deficits, what are the gaps, and then you really target those spaces. If we can mirror and model that system right alongside, it doesn't become two different things. It becomes two sides of the same coin then. And so if we can kind of help people save space in their brains about how does the process work, that's really where we try to use the braid of MTSS to come alongside and make sure that we're also showing, we're looking at our data, we're looking at our evidence and determining is this working or not, and then adjusting accordingly instead of just pushing forward and hoping that it gets better with a feeling. We really wanted to show evidence that this system is something that can function and stand. So what we worked on doing, again, and I'll bring up our little braid here, we really wanted to try to integrate how our specialty roles with counselors, with our mental wellness team, and with our school-based community mental health services can work. So we really tried to follow the triangle that educators love to use, where you talk about tiers and you talk about moving up. So in just a very simple kind of quick overview, we really view our school counselors as our tier 1 support for students. There's been a lot of work making sure that there is at least one counselor full-time in every building. So we really viewed that person as all students in building A have access to that school's counselor. And so that's where we're going to kind of route some of our services through to make sure, just based on availability and presence, our counselors are our tier 1. From there, we looked at our 4 mental wellness team members. There are 4 of them. 2 of them split our 7 elementaries. 1 of them serves both of our intermediates and both of our middle schools. And then our last one is full-time in the high school, because our high school does account for about 1/3 of our district. So we thought we better leave her stay put in the one spot. So if our school counselors are our tier 1, we really wanted to use their knowledge being full-time in a building for our mental wellness team, who could only be there 1, maybe 2 days a week, to really make sure that students getting referred to that level of service are getting targeted support that is beyond what you would expect at the tier 1 level. We also then wanted to make sure that steps were moving up. If we have a student in a high level of need who would really benefit from some more intensive supports, through the use of our contract hours, now we can access Cummins regardless of insurance to make sure that students are being served. We also try to be very intentional about noticing that while we often have plans to step up, we want to make sure that we're being as intentional about what are those plans to step back down. What often happens, especially when it comes to mental health, is you shoot all the way to the top of that triangle. You get a lot of support. But then when it comes time to discontinue services, you've reached max benefit. Once you take those supports away, it's very easy for a student to bottom out and then boomerang back to the top again. We wanted to make sure that we were providing step down supports so that people can get their needs met, build the skills out while still being tethered, still being linked to someone who can help them practice those skills, be there when a speed bump happens, so that they can continue to grow in that process. So we also try to be very intentional about when students are getting ready to discontinue Cummins services, that we link them with our mental wellness team to make sure that they're connected with an intermediate level of support before releasing them back out to tier 1. And again, that kind of follows that braided model of where's our data telling us that our students are needing support at. We also want to differentiate between the services that our school counselors and our mental wellness team can provide. We do not want to disenfranchise any group because they both come with such powerful specialties. So we really wanted to try to hone in between what are the differences in the services that a counselor versus a school social worker serving as a mental wellness provider can provide. And one area that we noticed we really needed to define was what is a small group, because counselors are amazing at running small groups, but that's the model that our mental wellness team had to function in because they were in a building 1 day a week. So we really tried to tease that apart and focus on what are the specialties that those two professions bring. We tried to go with the idea that counselors can provide a more psychoeducational small group and move our mental wellness groups to more mental health-based topics. So for example, you could have a student who maybe needs an organization and study skill group because you've seen the backpack and you know the folders and it is everywhere. But that student is also dealing with maybe some anxiety, some nervousness, and some feelings of apprehension about school. That student could be dual served because you have people that are really targeting into two different areas there. You're not both running the same type of group, but the groups support and build on each other to help build that student's capacity to be more successful. So I talked a little bit about our tiers and I talked a little bit about our support model. And I want to share a little more in depth about what it means to be at tier 1, what it means to be at tier 2, and what it means to be at tier 3 here in Avon, just for contextual sake. Last year, among our 7 elementaries, we were in a very unique position in that we had some schools that were really starting to get into universal social emotional learning curriculum, but they were using 2 different curriculum. And we had one of our schools who just wasn't there yet. That's fine. We're not here to judge anyone. That's the reality of what last year was. The 2 different programs were the Universal with Second Steps and Universal with a program called The Leader in Me. What has happened this year, because of what happened in the spring with COVID and because of the shift to e-learning, Avon has just made a commitment with our elementary schools. Our 7 elementaries are going to be moving towards all 7 using the same curriculum and all 7 being more aligned with having a morning meeting and having those lessons paced out. So while a global pandemic is never a good thing, we are using that as a lever to move towards more coordinated and consistent services for students, knowing that as they matriculate up from 7 elementaries to 2 intermediates, they were coming with a hodgepodge of stuff to 5th grade. We want to make sure that our 5th graders are entering and we know that these are the skills that they have entered with. So that's something that we are very excited about this year. That's been a change for us. Our intermediates, when they talk about universal social emotional learning, last year at 5th grade had a dedicated related arts class just to social emotional learning using the Second Steps curriculum. But when it got to 6th grade, it got a little more at the teacher's discretion if they wanted to use that material or not. Middle school was a wonderful surprise. I came from middle school. I was over in Warren Township at Creston Middle School. Principal Lewis, I see you, wanted to shout you out. And one program that the middle school really surprised me with was they were using a program called Lion's Quest. It follows the same Castle SEL competencies. It's a little more interactive and it's a little, it's similar to Second Steps in that it's more scripted. But our middle schools shocked me because they embraced this wholeheartedly. They changed their master schedule to include a special advisory class on Wednesdays, 3 out of the 4 weeks a month for an hour to really spend time digging into and building this support for our middle school, which we know is a challenging time. So the fact that our middle school really launched into this head first last year made my middle school heart so happy. And then finally, one of the services that we think about for high school, our high school elected to use a program called School Connect, and they worked on doing some piloting with their freshmen and also with a couple very highly invested teachers. Everyone knows that the high school schedule is a complete different beast. We wanted to respect that, and we are continuing to kind of work through the freshmen and we're going to follow those groups as we go along, thinking about what skills we would like our students to leave with. There was a great question that was asked last year at the Whole Child Summit. When you think about when a student graduates, what is the one skill you want them to leave with? Very rarely is the answer, I want them to know how to do the Pythagorean theorem, or I really need them to understand, E = MC². Most of the time when we think about what we want our students to leave with, we want our students to show integrity. We want our students to be respectful. We want our students to show compassion, to be empathetic with others. Now we're taking the time to really teach those skills, and just now, just in the last 2 weeks, we are really moving to teach those in a lot more coordinated fashion. Again, all of the programs that we're using follow the CASEL competencies. They all minimally address self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. The verbiage changes slightly with Leader in Me. That is going to move from a primary to a supplemental in the 2 buildings that we're using that. It's not going to go away. They're very invested in that program, and that's fine, but we are going to kind of agree to use one master curriculum when it comes to talking about social emotional learning skills so that we can track what has been built up as our students progress from grade to grade. So take a quick breath because this is very exciting, and I want to make sure that we get through in case there's time for questions. I don't have the question box up in front of me, so I'm not sure if they're coming in yet or not. But one thing we also needed to be cognizant of is that if we are going to come under the umbrella of MTSS and try to braid alongside, we also understood that we are going to need to find ways to measure this, and we are going to need to create database decision-making rules. If we're going to seek the protections of MTSS, we have to follow along because fair is fair, and we need to be accountable to what we're doing, how it's working, or if it's not, what adjustments are we making either in our instruction, our delivery, our methods, what are we doing differently to make sure that we are seeing progress and gains in those different areas. So last year, I can share with you, this is data from our district, the number of students who were taught Second Steps universally. I can share the number of students who were taught the Leader in Me. The Lions Quest numbers, those are our total middle school numbers. Those are both of our middle schools, both grade levels. School Connect numbers that are reflected there are primarily our freshmen, and again, those few select teachers that were really invested and really interested in trying that out. So in a district of about 10,000 kids, we were able to reach in year 1 of building, of just going for this, you know, as best we could, we were able to reach 6,000 of our students in year 1. And that was with competing curriculum, competing demands, and not having a good alignment or understanding of what is the total direction that we want to be moving into. And if you like a chart better, I have a chart for you as well. What we kind of see here in the chart is our universally taught was at 57%. We did have a couple buildings who, if they were using a different curriculum, tried to integrate Second Steps as a supplemental class or as an additional related art. So that's where you see those numbers at. The students who did not receive universal SEL really accounts for our 10th, 11th, and 12th graders in high school. So we really wanted to be thinking about, again, when we're thinking about coming under MTSS and really looking at an integrated model, how are we going to measure the instruction to determine if the curriculum is effective, if the learning is effective? And one of our elementary teachers decided that she wanted to dig a little bit deeper. Her building was doing Second Steps universally, but she was hearing things in the hallway that had her a little confused and concerned. So she surveyed her teachers, and she found that 79% of her teachers were completing the main social emotional learning lesson each week, but they were not finding the time or the availability in their schedule to conduct the follow-up lessons that should be done to kind of help embed that practice. Just like you wouldn't teach a math lesson one time and hope students to have mastery of it, you'd want to follow that up and do some additional practice. They were noticing they were giving them the bulk of the lesson, but they weren't having the practice that students need to really gain mastery. Teachers identified that students understood general concepts, but they were not able to really apply the skills in real time the way that we were hoping for them to. They appreciated the fact that their building had a common language to talk about things, and it was great for discussions, but the biggest barrier was creating time for the discussions. They were trying to fit their social emotional learning into an already packed science and social studies block, and there were competing curriculum demands that they were trying to meet as well. So what happened was this counselor shared with her building principal what was going on, and last year they agreed to try to find 5 more minutes in their master schedule to allow for daily practice of the skills. And we were stoked to get 5 minutes last year. Because of everything that shifted with COVID, and because we realized that students' social emotional learning needs have risen as the top priority, we've been able to get an agreement from our elementary administrators that there's going to be a 30-minute morning meeting that will be our delivery time every day for Second Steps. So we went from being ecstatic in one building for 5 minutes to now we truly have identified this space of time, and we are going to hold that time for social emotional learning, to build it with our teachers, to build it with our students, and to practice those skills. We don't just want to read the lesson, we want to find ways for them to embed and integrate the things that they are learning so that they are comfortable, confident, and competent when it comes time to apply that skill. And again, in going with accountability, we tried to recognize that we are going to have to find ways to measure what is happening when it comes to the delivery of social emotional learning. What we have done is we have used a social emotional learning screener called Panorama to assess our students with where they are at when it comes to their social emotional learning. We are actively measuring and using that data to inform decisions about what happens next for those students. We administered our first round of this survey in January, and we released the results to our administrators, and then we had to shut down school. We do have a commitment, though, that we are going to run our screener 3 times this year and use that data to determine how students are performing, and based on how they respond to the questions, if they may be in additional need of services from our counselors, for our mental wellness team, or a possible candidate for some additional school-based mental health. Now we are asking kids, do you feel safe at school? Do you feel like you are connected to an adult? Do you feel like you are treated with respect daily? The questions were very simple, straightforward questions, and they were all answered on a Likert scale, but the responses that we got really caused us to pause and look and see what is going on. What are we currently doing? And what do we need to be doing? If we are not happy with these results, what changes in our practice as adults need to happen so that we can make sure all students feel connected to at least one person in the building, that students feel like they are safe in their classrooms, in their hallways, and throughout their building. And those are things that we really had to look at and figure out how are we going to address. And when we think about running our screener again, what do we do? How fast do we move? I'm not a spokesperson for Panorama. We just happen to be using their platform. I will say it's very user friendly to navigate, and it does have a lot of tools and supports. If you are looking to give some low lift support for teachers and some high yield data results, it's something to consider. Their questions are open platform, so you can look at everything they ask and the way that they ask it. But it's really important for us to be asking brave questions about how this information is landing if we want to know if it's working or not. You have to ask the question. You can't be afraid of the answer. You just have to be ready to make a shift in practice, to enhance, to change, to maybe go back to the drawing board. If something is completely not working, don't continue to do what's broken. Look at doing what's better. I'm going to talk a little bit, so that's kind of our universal, is we provide students with access to counselors. We're providing them with universal social emotional learning instruction. Now we're going to look at that next tier of support, and that's where our mental wellness team comes into play. We were able to hire our social workers serving in this role through Project Aware, and these are the goals of Project Aware, and it's really about increasing awareness and support when it comes to mental health for students and for families going through the school lane. Our social workers came together last year, and they really worked to create a mission and a vision that kind of captured the goals and the essence of Project Aware. Also realizing that the team that we were able to assemble, our little Avenger squad, comes to us with a really, really interesting range of skills. We have a school social worker with 18 years of experience. We have a grief counselor who's worked with community. We have a social worker who has done school-based mental health and has worked with child psychiatry. We have a social worker who's done Tier 2 in a large Indiana public school district, working kind of in that targeted zone. So bringing together all of their specialties. This was the mission and the vision statement that they came up with, knowing that they were going to have to build a new program in real time, serving kids and making it work in every possible aspect. I mentioned before we split our team to serve every building has access to a mental wellness team provider. For most buildings, though, it is 1 day a week. There are a few spots where they're 2 days a week, with the exception of the high school. That person is there full time. The program operates, it's free of charge for any Avon student. It's non-diagnostic. We do try to be evidence-based and evidence-informed in the approaches that we use. They use a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy techniques and dialectical behavioral therapy techniques. And again, we use techniques and skills because we are really trying to be a skill-based program to help students recognize, address, and gain skills when it comes to managing mental health, because mental health is something we all experience. It's how do we kind of move towards wellness in that vein. Real quick, the service model that this program is operating under is we try to really fit in a PBIS Tier 2 model. This is not a lifetime thing. We're looking at a target goal of like a 4 to 6 week group with between 4 and 8 students. And depending on the building, depending on what's going on, the lessons are typically about 30 minutes. So that's where we serve the bulk of our students at. We also recognize that not everybody is in a place where a small group is the best method for them. So we do serve students who are not on an individual basis, who are not quite ready for small group. It may be short-term or it may be transitional, especially if a group is already started and let's say a student is discharging from our school-based mental health. We may see that student one-on-one, and then when the next round of group kind of comes around, we integrate that student in. And again, I mentioned our lessons are very skill-based so that kids are leaving group every week with some practical tips and strategies on how they can recognize in themselves and then how they can apply those skills. And I'm happy to share these things with you. I am not afraid to say that we had to make a lot of changes. We learned as we went. So if you want to snap the QR code, this is a sample of what a referral form for our mental wellness team looks like. This has gone through when we start, we'll be on our 8th iteration of what this looks like. We've adjusted our information, we've adjusted our method, but being in a building 1 day a week, we really rely on those building personnel to provide us with some information about what happens. Once we get a referral, we use data, we review the student's records, we reach out to get guardian consent. We will not see a student if the guardian does not approve it. We try to be very upfront and transparent about our processes so people know exactly what you are getting when you agree to participate in small group services. Our mental wellness team completes an individual intake with every student, and then once all that's done, they start group services. So there's a lot happening along the way, but the goal is to really make sure that students are being seen quickly, that guardians are informed about the process, and that information is also flowing to the school. Here's what we cover in week 2 of this group. We send newsletters to parents every week saying, hey, ask your student about this skill, have them demonstrate this particular technique with you to make sure that everybody is involved in the process.
Krista, one quick question before we move forward.
Yes.
The question in the chat is, how many total social workers do you have, and is there a ratio that you consider, and how many to hire based on student population?
Yep. So the almighty dollar was our determining factor, and we were able to squeeze nickels together, make them scream, and we were able to get 4. I would love 6, but now funding is being shifted to PPE. So knowing that we have a limited number, we really tried to be very targeted in how we're doing things. Our district is also going to be redistricting, and we'll be shifting from 7 elementaries to 6, which will make the elementary caseload a little more equitable. You have to start with where you are, though, and it's not going to fit for everyone. And we had 12 buildings to serve. Our district did not want to go with a more pilot option where we embed people full-time in a building, serving some but not others. Everybody wanted a piece. So that was how we agreed to compromise, was using that. Does that help answer that question? I'll go ahead and say yes, it does.
Yep, it does.
Okay, thanks. So the slide that you guys see, this is kind of, I love a good flow chart. It really helps my brain consolidate tables and data and graph and then text as well. And again, this is in the slides. If you want a blown up version, I can absolutely send you the PDF as well. This has been through drafts and iterations as well. We really wanted to try to show very quickly and visually to folks how the system can work. How do you respect current practices while integrating new ones simultaneously. So when we think about how a student gets referred to services for a counselor, for any type of SEL or mental wellness need, how would you identify that student? In the past, our referral lanes would have been either a student self-referral, a teacher referral, or a parent referral. Those are great sources of information, and we don't want to lose those. But we also now have a systematic method of asking kids, how do you feel about the skills that you're being taught and how are you using them? So we had to try to find a way to bridge those two referral sources to make sure that we're reaching as many students as we can, because we know that the need is out there. So we really tried to look and think about how can we maximize efficiently a counselor's use of time as they look at routing these referrals, as we look at processing this information. How do we incorporate our panorama data and our teacher anecdotal information to make sure we route kids to those different services? And again, when you get down to the social worker level, you can kind of see that, here we're kind of teased down into, small groups, one-on-one, again, at skill building level. And again, this is a more detailed version of that triangle where we flow to a more intense level, but we also gradually release off. When we see students being successful, you have to give them room and space to try without that same high level of support. We don't want people in services forever. That's not the goal. The goal is to build confidence and competence within ourselves. It doesn't mean we may not need to ask for more help at another time, but we want to make sure that students are gaining those skills to independently practice the self-regulation that they need to be successful across a variety of settings. So I said I would share our data. Here it is. This is what it looks like. And we broke these, we broke the information apart a little bit just so that you can see information about referrals, how many were accepted, how many were completed. We also had to take into account too that there were parents who said, no, thank you. We're not interested in that right now. We said, that's fine. We're here if you want us or need us at a later point. When we get to the more secondary level, we also make sure that students have the option if this is not for them, but they have the right to self-determine. So this is not a mandatory service. Students can decline services as well. We also noted that we had some families that we would make multiple attempts to outreach to in different formats, and sometimes we just didn't hear back. We accounted for those numbers. Some students had a change in their situation, and that could be, they were in the referral process, maybe they were going through the intake, and then they ended up moving. So we noted those numbers as well. There were some students that somewhere between the referral and reaching out, we recognized that this is a much higher level need, or there was a dramatic shift. We had the option and flexibility to accelerate that to Cummins to make sure that students are being served at that appropriate level. You'll notice that our semester one numbers, I have a little asterisk there. In the beginning, we had a lot of duplicate referrals, and there was a lot of times that we had to go back and ask for additional information. We really needed to get a little more specific on what the need was or what was going on. Being there one day a week and being brand new employees, it was really kind of hard to tease apart some of that coded language. So that's why you see kind of a big gap between the number of referrals and then kind of the different numbers in there as well. I included our Q3 numbers because you can really see once we got through that first semester of learning, we really started to hit a stride. Our social workers were having caseloads between 46 and 50 each. And if you think about that, they're there in a building one day a week serving multiple small groups, they were rolling when people started getting an understanding of what's going on. And then COVID hit and we had to go virtual. And that's almost a different discussion. I don't want to get too in the weeds there yet. We can look at that later if we have time in the questions. But I wanted to show that once we got the program, once we started to put some wings on our little plane, we really started to fly and we were getting a lot of good buy-in and support from folks as well. The last thing that I wanted to say here too is that this program was the method of the referral was so popular that some of our buildings actually hacked our form and they started sending it out to their teachers every week. And they used that as a way to find out what's going on with students, what did I not know about? And then the counselors and the administrators in those buildings were sitting down and they were actually helping route students to, hey, I didn't know that in classroom A, Billy was having a lot of problems with this. We're going to start with our counselor here and the principal is going to reach out to the family as well. Then if Billy is still in need after that counselor small group, we can move them up to our mental wellness team. So it really created some internal ripples and structures that we weren't anticipating, but the buildings found very, very helpful. I want to share some information real quick about our contract hours, and I kind of mentioned the history a little bit about how they came to be. Is that, you know, there was just a high need, and if your insurance is a barrier, we had the availability through our grant to make sure that students were still being served. Commons is in all of our buildings in some form of another, either through a skills provider, a therapist, or a combination of both. There are a few buildings where they do travel back and forth, but for the most part, buildings can be served at any time by a Commons provider. I'm going kind of quick because I want to make sure that I respect the time for questions, because I don't have that chat box up right now. I do want to share our Commons data as well from our contract hours, because if your district is considering a line item for mental health services, this is really helpful. This was our lived experience, and I'll share a little bit more with you about that. Through our contract hours from July last year to the end of June this year, this is what it looked like in terms of the number of sessions for students and the total number of hours per service. And again, if you like a pie chart instead of a graph, I'm here for you. Intakes accounted for 3% of our services. Individual skill and therapy were pretty close. If you cut the difference, those are about 30%. Case management was another big piece of how those services were spent. And the case management, a lot of the times, was the provider calling and talking with the guardian at home about how things were going. So our case management looks like a big piece of it, but it was a lot of communication as well, and updating about here's what happened, here's what you need to know, here's how we're going to move forward. Contract hours were new for us, and so I wanted to kind of show on this slide, again, things were starting to really pick up and things were really starting to get moving once we got better in iterations of our referral process, and then COVID hit. And you can see, in February, and then March, a lot of people were in the wind. A lot of people were not available, did not have their own internal bandwidth to do some of that deeper processing that you would want to expect at that tier 3 level. And some people realized that teletherapy at that point in time maybe wasn't for them. It doesn't mean it won't be forever, but at that point, it just was not a good match for them. So again, if this kind of helps anybody, if you're advocating for a line item in your general fund for mental health services, please use this data. Please let it speak for you, and that there is a need, that there are a lot of students that could be served in this way if we're very intentional about it. One thing that we did learn with our contract hours was that we wanted to be a lot more specific about what they looked like. We did have some students who were in services for 9 months, and we realized that that is maybe not the best practice that we wanted to do. So we really looked at creating a tighter package of services where what we called our package would include an intake. It would include 8 individual sessions. It could be skill therapy or a combination depending on the age. And we wanted it to include 2 family sessions as well, because we all know kids don't live in a bubble, and what happens at home and school flows back and forth. So if we thought that we really, if they agreed to the services, they are also agreeing to be a part of 2 family sessions, to really use that then as a checkpoint on, do we continue with services? Was that enough to get them over that hump? Did we uncover some additional things that need more support? And how can we continue to help and serve that? And again, we worked on making, if you want to snap the QR code if you want, we worked on making these services more data-driven instead of anecdotal narratives. So we were looking at using adapting the student's strengths and difficulties questionnaire, because it provides some really great cut scores and some really great, just broad guidance, and it's free to use, to see if that would kind of help us determine routing for students. And that's something that we're still looking at. In being responsive to everything that's going on. Oh, there it is. So this is what I was talking about when I was talking about our package, is here are the ways that we really want to try to hone in those contract hour services. Again, especially if you're looking at creating a line item in your general fund for it, you want to be very specific about how much it's going to cost to serve each student. And I know that sounds it can sound a little cold, but it is a factor, and there are a lot of kids to serve. So you need to know what the total cost is per student, how many students you can serve, and understand where the need is at with those students. So what we figured out is this was a little over $1,000 per student to serve at this level, and that lets people project and predict based on past needs what you would anticipate a need to be in the future. So again, I just want to reiterate that this has been an evolving process for us. We have worked really hard. We've rocked a lot of boats. We rocked a lot of minds, and we understand and we try to be very upfront about this is going to change. We are learning as we go, but every day we are getting better at this process. We are providing better services. We are getting more in line, getting more in sync, getting more shared understanding. We're bringing people along to the idea that if we can start building this base level of skill with students, we can move the starting needle of where the conversations start at. If you think about an elementary building that may not have had any social emotional learning, if now everyone, if the teachers are helping provide universal SEL in an aligned curriculum, coordinated weekly, not lockstep, but it is moving in a similar manner, then the counselor doesn't have to go in and provide that foundational language. The counselor can come in and look at a different program, like maybe they want to do Mind Up, maybe they want to do zones of regulation. Instead of cherry picking out of those curriculums, they can start and they can run their classroom lessons in a totally different way because the foundational language has been established. And then if you think about if a student may need Tier 2 mental wellness team support, foundational language has been established, additional supplemental curriculum has been established. The starting place for these kids is now so much further. So when you think about how this can build upon itself, it's really easy to get excited and carried away like I do, because you are moving the starting needle for so many people in so many ways that it really allows us to tap into those specialties that we bring in these different professions when it comes to how can we serve kids holistically. So we just know that we have to keep asking questions. We know we have to keep measuring, and we can't be scared of what the data tells us. We really need to embrace, we have to adapt and evolve as well. We can't get so stuck in where we were that we forget to take that next step forward. So I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to try to shift my screen. Alicia, if you could help if there's any questions that popped up along the way.
So quick question. It looks like maybe the last QR code did not work correctly. Just wondering if the links that you've included, if you could include those maybe at the end, that would be really great. Or we could send them out afterwards, just so that people can utilize these resources, because I know they're all incredible.
Yes, absolutely. I'll send you links, because if you do snap the QR code, some of the forms come up a little weird on a mobile phone. They are better to view on a computer where you, sometimes if you have, different scales, it reads a little odd. So I will make sure that those get out to you guys. And again, feel free to copy it. Feel free to edit it. Just don't respond in it, because then I get all of your answers. But if those questions, if anything about that process works or makes sense for you, take it. Please learn from what we learned from. Don't redo what we did. Take it and make it better for you and your situation, your students, and your district.
So I just want to commend Krista. I know that I've been in contact with her a lot about thinking about how do we do things in a systematic way. And I think that they've done a great job with that. And I love that you've talked about the growth that you've made in the process, because of course we're not going to do things the most perfect way the first time we do it. So making sure that we're iterating as we're going and those changes. What questions do other people have during this time for Krista? And you can feel free to either unmute yourself or add it into the chat box.
Krista, Principal Lewis here. How are you?
Glad to see you.
I want to break that silence. Hey, a good question, just kind of on your thoughts. We, as you know or don't know, in Warren, we implement second step K-12, and we have time built into our schedule. Right now, we also have building-based counselors and still have a partnership with Gallahue. And so we have multiple aspects of what you guys are implementing as well there in Avon. What suggestions or just little tidbits could you make about really utilizing our second step program to the fullest, especially at the K-4 level? Any thoughts or things that went really well for you guys?
Yeah, so one thing I would make sure that you want to do is you want to create those feedback cycles with your teachers. A couple of our elementaries are, but our middle school has been the bravest in asking questions about how did this lesson work for you? What changes would you want to see? What would you want to do differently? And what they've done is they've taken that and then they make those adjustments so that the next year, they're not trying to remember, oh, in August, what did we say about lesson 1.2? They already have that built and set ready to go. So they send out, what I would suggest is sending out just a weekly 3 or 4 questions. What worked, what didn't, suggestions, comments. And then integrating those immediately so that the next time they pick up that lesson, those adjustments are live in that. I love a good quick turnaround feedback cycle. It has to be quick or they won't do it. But that was very helpful in our elementary schools and our middle schools where they used that. Teachers felt heard and they felt responded to as well, which when you're thinking about if your teachers are using it, you want to make sure, for some people, this is not their space. They don't feel like they were trained for it, or especially when you get older grades, this isn't science, this isn't what I signed up for. We need to make sure they understand this is for everybody and support them on that.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So Krista, do you have behavior specialists involved in your tiered systems of support?
So we do have behavior consultants. We have 2 behavior consultants here in Avon, but they work in a little bit of a different lane. They kind of serve tier 1 and tier 3 externally. So they're more available for like teacher consultation. They can do classroom observations and give a teacher feedback on what they see and some strategies there. Then they also get involved kind of more at the tier 3 special education level when they're talking about specific student plans. If they need an FBA or if they're looking at like revising a student's behavior intervention plan, they kind of come along there. They don't provide direct services. They're more indirect kind of guiders. Does that help?
Question from Jody. She said, I am understanding correctly that Avon utilized an outside company to provide these services. Did you use an outside company?
For what services? We have a lot going on.
Jody, is that for mental health services that you're thinking? Yes.
So we do have a partnership with Cummins, who's our community school-based mental health agency. They provide school-based services, so we do have an agreement with them that they are the one agency that's in our building for mental health. But Avon hired internally the 4 social workers to serve as our mental wellness team. So we do have in-district support as well. So we kind of are hitting both ends of that.
Okay, and then what about support for SEL? Is that all in-district?
That's in district as well, yes.
And then she also asked that they're in the search for an SEL screener for their daily program, and that they're a small corporation, about 2,500 students, K-wide. And if you have any suggestions with that, that'd be great.
So I mentioned Panorama, that's the company that we are currently using, but I will say that, and Panorama is very open with this, all of their questions are open source. So you could go to their question book, you could pick what you want to be assessing, and you could adapt those questions and then create a Google form or create a Microsoft form, whatever it is, and you could send those out. The bump that I would say you might hit is that internally you guys have to desegregate your data and you guys have to figure out what your cut points are. But if you have a really excited math teacher, or maybe that's a personal passion of yours, it is doable. You just want to look at what that might be for you, and maybe start small. Maybe you start at one building at one grade level, and you start doing some practice screeners if you want to create your own. It's doable. It's definitely more lift, but Panorama makes all of their questions available, so you don't have to start from scratch. You can start with something existing.
And it looks like there's some other links to other options for universal screeners in the chat. Another question. So the second step lessons, or just the SEL lessons, is it taught by a combination of people or just one person? Is it the counselors? Is it teachers?
So they are primarily taught by our classroom teachers. We do have a couple buildings where they are co-teaching, which means that you have a larger size group, and that's more at our middle schools because they had to do some adjustments in their master schedule. So you have 2 teachers in their co-teaching, which allows you to do different things, as you know, with co-teaching. But for the most part, it is being done by the classroom teacher.
Krista, I have a question on your partnership with your community mental health partner.
Uh-huh.
So I'm a therapist starting with East Allen County Schools, and they're just starting on, building their SEL curriculum and everything. But right now they only provide therapy to special ed children who are in an ED program, and they're kind of afraid to expand that outside of the ED program just for cost sake. Do you guys pay for those services when students don't have the insurance or have to pay those co-pays?
So that's what we did with our contract services. If a family had private insurance and the deductible was too high, there were logistical barriers, maybe there were transportation barriers. So we did kind of come in to kind of help fill that gap. But I would really encourage some brave questions. If not now, then when, right? Because you know that there are students in your district who are not served by special ed, who are it could be just a regular, typically developing student, but is having some serious, significant mental health challenges. COVID has really allowed us the opportunity to get creative and think about different ways to provide services. Teletherapy is one of those methods that can be utilized. I know that there's a lot of work being done right now, and there have been a lot of approvals for different teletherapy services, at least through the end of this calendar year. So if not now, this is a great time to get creative about if the family can't get to that provider, can you find a way to set up a private location with a laptop and headphones for that student to engage in teletherapy services? Teletherapy has also gotten easier because you can cross lines, and it's not just, is there a licensed panel provider with your specific insurance assigned to your district? You can cross to different spaces within that organization if they have it and find somebody who can meet that insurance need before you start to rely on school dollars for it. But I think it is worth asking the question is the need impacting our students enough that we need to think about ways to fund this? Because if we don't, the impact, not just for that student, but the outward impact of that. How are the teachers impacted by this? How are the classmates impacted by this? How do we really move to meet that need?
Thank you. Do you have to limit that at all? Like the cost you spend on the tier 3?
That's where so that was a learning process for us. And that's where we kind of came to that package model with an intake, 8 sessions plus 2 family sessions, because we were able to price that out for it to be about $1,000 for that package for one student. I mean, it's going to depend on your agency and kind of different things there. But we based on what Cummins was telling us, based on their internal data of how things were working, how students are progressing. I'm not going to tell anybody you can or can't. I just want to know if you're making progress, right? Are you getting your need met? Are you learning the new skills, and are they effective for you? That gave us a starting point to have conversations about funding that, to determine how we want to move forward.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Gotta mute myself. I've gone ahead and linked also the presenter evaluation in the chat. If you would take just a minute to fill that out before you head to your next session. Before we do that though, does anybody have any last questions in the last minutes? Well, Krista, I thank you so much for your knowledge and information, your willingness to share. We hope that you all have a great day, and we will see you in future sessions.
Thank you.